Hello, my name is Sean Brown, and I'm from the Pittsburgh. I'm the Director of Public Health Applications at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, and I'd like to welcome you to our latest installment of the Bridge Webinar Series. The Bridge Webinar Series is a series held jointly by the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, the McGill Center for Convergence of Health and Economics, and the Johns Hopkins Global Obesity Prevention Center. It is designed to prepare for the next generation of big data analytics woven into transdisciplinary and intersectoral sciences, policy, and innovation, and serving as a catalyst for solutions that scale to better address the seemingly intractable problems that lie at the nexus of health and wealth production, distribution, and consumption. It is a key to accelerate change lies. Its key to accelerate change lies in establishing bridges between big data, sectorial big data, and between data and content. And so to get people talking about this and understand new techniques and research in making these bridges and connections, we instituted the Bridge Webinar Series, and we are delighted that we've had a number of really good speakers, and today is no exception. I will turn the floor over to Laurette Dubé to, so we've lost Laurette, so I guess I will fumble through introducing you, Nathan, because I don't have your bio sketch, so I apologize in advance if I flub this up. So today we're very fortunate to have the speaker, Nathan Young from McGill University. He's the Assistant Professor of Marketing at and he's a Desautels. Did I get it right, Nathan?
Close enough, yeah.
Desautels Faculty of Management at McGill University, and he will be speaking about success that breeds success, weight loss dynamics in the presence of short-term and long-term goals. And when Laurette comes back on, we'll give her a chance to say kind words about you after the presentation, if that's okay, Nathan.
Oh, that's more than fine. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And thank you to Laurette for the opportunity to share some of the insights from my new research. This is joint work with my co-author, Kazuki Iwataki at Yale School of Management, where he's an assistant professor in marketing. And so just a brief background about me. Some of my more recent work now tries to use big data sets as a way to better design weight loss programs or weight loss applications. And so today, what I'll present is an example of using a very, very large data set to get insights to help a weight loss mobile application better develop its success at helping people lose weight. So this is kind of the usual slide where we show that in the U.S. and in Canada, obesity is a serious problem. I don't need to spend too much time highlighting this fact that everyone probably knows. Now, our hope is that there's been a lot of behavioral economics and psychological insights that we believe could be effective at encouraging healthy behavior. And a lot of this work has been more focused on the monetary incentives, right? So if you give people some money or some sort of financial incentive, they are probably more likely to engage in healthier behavior or whichever behavior you want them to engage in. Now, some of the insights that the nutritionists and the health scientists have focused on more is the notion of personal goals. And so this idea is that personal goals actually serve as an important non-monetary incentive. You can think of a goal as a target that people move towards, right? And so you can think of many of us have had to undergo some sort of weight loss, especially as we get older. So one of the strategies we often use is that we say that by a certain date I want to weigh X pounds lighter than now, right? And so in principle, this should be an effective strategy, but the problem is that goal setting is not guaranteed to be successful. And so the most common pitfall is that people ultimately do not always fulfill their goals, right? And especially in weight loss, goals require a lot of focused attention. It requires a lot of motivation. And probably the most difficult thing is that it requires high levels of self-control, right? And so, despite the fact that goal-focused individuals statistically tend to be more successful at losing weight, it's not guaranteed. And so this is where kind of the mobile technology comes into play now. And one of the new innovations we see in virtually every mobile app for weight loss is the use of a short-term goal. And so this is the idea of setting smaller, more bite-sized targets for people to work towards as a way to hopefully eventually reach their long-term weight loss goal, right? So it could be like, an example could be the phone mobile app telling you should maybe try to lose X pounds a week, or maybe try to stay within a certain number of calories per day as a way to eventually stay on track and perhaps lose the weight. And so you see this in virtually all of the apps that for weight loss. And this is something that has been speculated as well in the blogosphere, right? And so this is just a screenshot of one of many articles you can find that try to promote the idea of what we call small victories, right? So you're encouraging yourself, motivating yourself by using the fact that yesterday you were able to, for example, avoid eating the McDonald's, or you were able to stay within a certain calorie limit, or maybe yesterday you took X 100 steps or 1,000 steps or 10,000 steps, whichever number you set. And so by checking that small victory, that helps hopefully propel you towards your longer term goal, right? So you see this goal setting not just in weight loss apps, but also in a lot of different applications, whether it's in marketing or economics or just in daily life, right? So, many of us have loyalty programs with the airlines we travel with. And many of these airlines, the travel loyalty programs have a tiered system where you're trying to reach, a certain level gets you gold status, another level gets you platinum status, and then so on and so forth. Video game developers are very well aware of how to develop these goals, right? The way in which they develop each level to make it progressively harder and maybe make some levels easier along the way. That's, part of it is also related to the science of setting goals. Even just daily task managers, Evernote or the one that I have shown in the screenshot. These are all examples where it allows you to set some sort of daily checklist where every time you check a task that you're able to successfully complete, it gives you a sense of accomplishment. It gives you the sense of the small victory. We also see this in energy conservation, right? So energy companies can try to incentivize you to use up less energy by cutting down your daily consumption of energy, as opposed to saying in a month you should cut down this large amount of energy. And then finally, we see this in education where it's not often the case where your grade is determined by one single exam. Often there's a series of smaller exams that the students have to take that leads up to and eventually a final exam, right? And so these are all examples where people are exposed to some sort of short-term goal, small target, something more bite-sized, with the hope that they'll eventually reach their long-term goal. And so, if we turn to some of the psychological and consumer behavior literature, it actually still not clear whether the goal progression or sub-goal progression or these short-term goal progressions, there's not 100% clear whether they're actually effective, right? So on the one hand, you could get some positive feelings of goal progress if you're able to achieve these small victories in weight loss and calorie restriction. But at the same time, what if you fail? What if on one day you splurged and you consume way more calories you should have? In that case, that could actually have a discouraging effect. Or furthermore, maybe if you're successful, that might lead to temporary disengagement in the long-term goal. Maybe you feel a bit overconfident. Maybe you feel like you deserve a reward for staying within the limit the previous day, right? And so these are all, there's a positive effect, but then there could also be negative downsides of these sub-goals. So what my co-author and I do is we obtain this very large data from a freemium mobile weight loss application, and to establish kind of the relationship between short-term goal success and long-term goal success, we use what we call regression discontinuity design, which I'll discuss further later on. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is identify the causal effect of short-term goal achievement, not just the correlational effects, but the causal effect. So really we want to see whether these goalposts that a person passes, whether these goalposts alone have a positive long-term impact. Once we have established whether or not there are these causal effects, we then build a dynamic structural model to help the mobile app develop optimal short-term goal design, right? So one question that the freemium mobile application may have is, given that they have some flexibility in terms of how they set their short-term goals, should they make it easier? Should they make it harder for the users as a way to get the users more engaged in the long run? And so this is something we can indeed answer for the company using a combination of the large data along with some modeling. So as I mentioned earlier, this is work that's going to be related to some of my other research on weight loss program design, and in particular using very large data sets to help guide us in better developing these programs. This work is also related to some of the newer empirical literature that tries to identify the positive effects of self-control on weight loss. In marketing economics, there's also a growing literature that tries to model this behavior and estimate the data via a structural model. So we've seen this in terms of one example would be the Huang Huajian Sudare, where they model explicitly the decisions people make about whether to have healthy or not healthy drinks within the day. In a more psychological or consumer behavior side of things, there's plenty of work that looks at little tweaks that can try to nudge people towards healthier behavior. And then finally, if we take a step back and look at the broader picture, there's been some marketing and economics work that looks at the implications of health policy on actual behavior of people. So as I mentioned, the data set we have is from a large freemium mobile application called Lose It. They're among the most popular and well-recognized mobile applications for weight loss and calorie tracking. It's an interesting app. It can be synchronized with your smartphones so that it can infer not only what you're eating, but also how many steps you've taken. it's linked to the step counter on our phones. It's among the easiest applications to use to enter in the food and the calories you've consumed. It has a database of, the last I checked was close to 10 million food items, a database where you could just search as you would on Google the food that you consumed, and you simply just pick and choose which ones that the search results give you. It's a widely used application, and the company gave us data on the well over 40,000 active users. And these are users that use the app daily over the course of several months. So for each individual user, we can actually see what they're doing from one day to the next for nearly a whole year. And so we have pretty much almost 10 million observations of people's calorie counting and weight loss outcomes from this company. And so this is just an example of a screen. This is just a screenshot of the application from used on an iPad, and you can see that it allows you to enter in the foods you ate for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the snack. There's a section to count how much exercise you did. You can, in addition to the step counter, you can also add in, if you did a certain amount of yoga or other type of exercise at the gym, you can add that to your exercise count. And so once you've entered in all these food items, the calories are already linked to each food item. So it does all the addition and calculation for you. It will basically tally up, what your net calories are for that day. And so, the net calories would then be how many food calories you consumed, net of how much you exercise, right? So exercise helps you, allows you to perhaps consume a little bit more. And the important thing is that the application also gives you a daily budget, which is different for everyone. And daily budget is calculated when you're registering for access to the app. And they base this daily calorie budget, or this daily calorie limit, based on how much you initially weighed, how much you wish to weigh after a certain number of months, your age, your gender, your height. And so using these and maybe some other pieces of information, the nutritionists at Lose It have come up with a formula to basically crank out a budget of calories that a user needs to stay within if they wish to reach that target weight that they set, right? And so in this screenshot, the budget that I was given was 1,915 calories. And you can see on the left screenshot, this is an example where I stayed within the budget. I consumed 1913 net calories. So I was under the budget, within the budget by 2 calories. So that's good. And so they used a green background to indicate cases where you're successful and you've stayed within the budget. Now suppose that I just had one additional marshmallow, which is 25 calories roughly. That would bring me over the limit. And so you can see on the right side of the screenshot, my net calories now is 1936, which is 21 above the amount I should have stayed within. And you can see that the background for that, that whether I'm over or under, it's a red color, right? And so really our research question is, how motivational is that green colored, success sign versus the red kind of sign of failure, right? So let me just jump into how we identify this effect, because what we're interested in is really how motivational is just the notion of staying within the budget, right? And so our empirical analysis will revolve around a discontinuity locally surrounding the daily budget of calories, right? And so what we're going to be doing ultimately is comparing the cases where you're barely staying within the budget, right? So by, let's say, 25 or fewer calories, for example, or the other side of the coin is you're barely violating the budget. You know, you ate that one additional marshmallow that just brought you to the tipping point, and you're just slightly above that calorie limit. And so the reason we want to focus on these two cases is that we believe they are probably the most comparable, right? And so this is, this will allow us then to really evaluate empirically the impact of just the short-term goal itself, right? And so the justification why focusing around the discontinuity may introduce some exogeneity that helps us in the identification is the notion that barely adhering and barely violating may be slightly beyond the control of the user, right? So it could be, you have a hot chocolate and if you just have the hot chocolate, you'd be fine, but you're conditioned to add a marshmallow to every cup of hot chocolate you have. And so because of that, you kind of went above the limit, even though if you just had the hot chocolate, you would have been fine. And so this is just, highlighting, showing a pictorial example of, staying within and barely staying above the calorie limit. So you see 0 for cases where you're exactly consuming the daily budget of calories that you're allowed. If you go to the right slightly, this is an example where you consume, let's say, 25 calories more than you should have. And if you go to the left, this is when you're consuming 25 calories within what you're allowed. And so the interesting thing is that it doesn't take a lot of food to bring you from one side of the picture to the other side of the picture. And really, actually, if the marshmallow is big enough, that's enough to bring you from, success to failure, barely successful to barely failing. And so to motivate kind of this sort of empirical design, we have a few pictures that I think really illustrate the impact of the goal itself. And we see that in the pictures, what we have here is on the vertical axis, we have the daily progress towards the future progress towards weight loss. And on the horizontal axis, we have calories above or below the daily budget. So you can see there's a 0. So that's a case where you're staying exactly within that limit. And the 3 pictures are, from left to right, we have the next day's weight loss success. You've got the next week's weight loss outcome. And then finally, you have how much weight you're able to lose in the next month. And in all of these cases, what you see is around that discontinuity where you're barely succeeding versus barely failing, you see a pretty large noticeable jump at this discontinuity, right? So just barely staying within the budget has a long-term implication on your actual weight loss success. And notice that in the picture, it's not easy. You can't see from the picture itself, but it's worth noting that what separates the 2 dots, the blue dot and the red dot, on a horizontal axis is really just 50 calories, right? But if you measure the how much the weight changes from 25 calories below the budget to 25 calories above the budget, that difference in the weight translated into calories is far, far greater than 50 calories, right? So it's not simply an artifact of you withholding calories that's generating the patterns we see in this picture, right? And so really staying within the budget, even just a little bit, has a very noticeable long-term impact and real impact on your eventual weight loss. Right? And so we find these pictures to be very inspirational, and so we our first empirical design is to do something very basic, and that what we're doing is just the simplest possible regression discontinuity design. Is not going to be the final specification, but it's just one that we want to make sure has some results. And so the main outcome of interest is weight loss, for example, future weight loss, the next day's weight loss, the next week's weight loss, or the next month's weight loss. And the main treatment we're interested in is whether or not the user stayed within the budget, right? And so if the coefficient in front of this A, this variable we define as A, if that coefficient is positive, that's suggesting that there's actually a motivational or encouraging effect of just staying within the limit barely. And so one of the things one of the technical aspects of a regression discontinuity design is that we also need a very flexible polynomial, which we describe as the P bracket C tilde IT minus 1. But I won't go into too much detail about that. But basically, that's a way to control for in a semi-parametric way the difference between the calories consumed and the target calories. Right? And so the main punchline from this is if we see that there are positive effects associated with simply staying within the budget barely on all the long-term weight loss outcomes. So whether it's next day's weight loss or next week's weight loss or next month's weight loss, we see a positive effect on their propensity to stay within the budget in the future. So what that's saying is that if I stayed within the budget yesterday in terms of my calories, I'm more likely to be disciplined and stay within my calorie limit today and perhaps day after and so on and so forth. And then finally, there's this is kind of a small magnitude, so we don't really push this, but we also see a positive, albeit weak effect on the probability of upgrading to the premium account. So as I mentioned, this mobile weight loss app is a freemium type of design in the sense you can pay a little bit of extra per month to get more features, more refined calorie counting capabilities. You can also avoid getting banner advertisements if you upgrade to the premium account. But just to note, the free version has pretty much everything you need, though, to track calories and keep track of your weight. So there's a noticeable positive effect of this short-term, what we call the small victories, if you will. Now, one of the things that might be of concern is that actually in virtually all cases, there's really no way to completely rule out the possibility of manipulation of this adherence variable that we're interested in, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm in some control of how many calories I'm consuming, how many calories I'm entering into the application. And so this defies part of this argument that you need about the exogeneity of the running variable, at least around that discontinuity of staying within the budget versus staying just going beyond the budget. But the good thing is that, despite the fact that there's a potential for this this bias, there's been actually a new identification approach developed by a few economists, which allow you to get some sort of inference, even in cases where there is some manipulation of the running variable. In fact, their method basically says that, what is the maximum extent to which manipulation of the treatment assignment, what's the maximum extent that it would affect the main estimates that we're interested in, right? So it's basically saying, let's look at the worst case scenario where we basically have no exogeneity in the variable we're interested in. And even in that case, do we still find some evidence of this positive effect of the small victories? And so to jump to the conclusion, we basically show that even the lower bound of this treatment effect for the small victory or the short-term goal achievement, the lower bound we see is 0.01, which is clearly above 0. And the upper bound is 0.118. And so the key is that this bound does not contain 0 at all. And which suggests that even in the worst case scenario where a large proportion of users are manipulating the calories that they're consuming or the calories they're entering, even in the worst case scenario, we still find evidence that the short-term goal achievement has a positive long-term effect on weight loss success and other sorts of behaviors. So, now that we've developed, we have built some confidence about our main regression discontinuity design, we consider an extension that allows for kind of a more dynamic approach. Right? So basically, we want to see to what extent the short-term, these small victories, to what extent these small victories persist over time. And there's some equation here, but really what I want you to take away from this is we're just thinking about here, what is the persistence of these positive effects from short-term victories. And from these pictures, you can see that the positive effect from the short-term goal achievement actually has some persistence over time. And in fact, even as far as 10 days beforehand, even 10 days later, the short-term goal achievement may actually still have an effect on your weight loss. Right? So as far back as 10 days beforehand, you can still see some effect of this short-term goal achievement. If we're looking at the future budget adherence, there is also some persistence in the sense that I'm more likely to adhere to the budget if I adhere to the budget, for example, 10 days ago. Right? And so we do see some persistence. There's some more interesting dynamics that we're still trying to smooth out and figure out what's going on. But in any event, we do see this longer-term positive effect. We see this longer-term positive effect for adhering to a more challenging budget. So maybe over time, if you were successful at one particular, 10 days ago at a particular budget, maybe 10 days later, you're more likely to adhere to a budget that's even more tight in terms of calories, right? And so it actually might suggest you can build up some of your successes to tackle even harder challenges. The only case where, there's not too much evidence of this persistence is the propensity to upgrade to premium. But in general, the link between the short-term goal achievement and the upgrade decisions to begin with was not very strong. So we didn't really expect there to be much for this picture. Now that we've established some empirical relationship, or at least a convincing empirical relationship between the short-term goal achievement and long-term success in weight loss, we thought, wouldn't it be interesting to think of ways to better improve the platform for the weight loss app. And one of the degrees of freedoms the company has in terms of the goals is they actually have some flexibility in terms of the budget of calories that they would suggest to each user. So right now they're using a canned formula that their in-house nutritionist gave about how many calories the user should stay within in order to reach their long-term goal. But there's actually some room to adjust that, upwards or downwards by around 5% from what they were telling us. Right? And so this suggests maybe there's a way to modify these daily budgets to further incentivize people to do well, further engage the users to lose more weight or be more successful in their calorie restrictions. And so to do this, we employ a more structural approach. So basically what I mean by this is we're going to embed a model that captures how users consume calories, right? So this will be, how many food calories they consume and how many exercise calories they expend over time. And where we have some flexibility is the recommended budget of calories, which is C star, according to the equation. We allow weight to evolve according to an autoregressive process. So your weight is likely a function of your weight yesterday, along with how many calories you could consume. And so in this model, we allow for an adherence effect, similar to the simpler regression discontinuity design, where it's a dummy variable or indicator, which basically says, are you within or not, or above the budget of calories that you were given. And we also explicitly control for long-term goal progress, which is represented by the function G that is in the slide. So we need this model to be dynamic because the idea is, if I consume a certain number of calories today as a rational person, I should expect my weight to either increase or decrease based on how much I'm consuming today. And so for this reason, we allow users to have some degree of forward-looking behavior so that they can maximize their discounted utility over time. And so the utility then is defined, it's really just a function of how many food calories, how many exercise calories they consumed. It's a function of whether they were within their daily budget of calories. Do they actually get some utility from staying within the budget? It's also a function of their weight loss, their long-term goal progress. So we allow the long-term goal progress to enter in a nonlinear fashion with a few polynomials. We also allow for user-specific heterogeneity through the fixed effect, and then in addition, we have idiosyncratic taste shock along with the optimization error, which is also idiosyncratic. So to estimate the model, we employ a very standard approach often used to estimate such models of dynamics, which is the two-step procedure by Barry, Bankert, and Levin. It's basically the model we have specified is in principle a very difficult model to solve, right? Because the state space is going to be very large, especially given we want to make sure that we don't do any discretization of the key states, related to calories. Because when we're talking about calories, even just a little bit can have an impact, right? Especially because we're focusing on the discontinuity around barely succeeding and barely failing at the daily goal. And so for that reason, we want to preserve as much continuity in the way in which we view these variables. But one of the byproducts of that, one of the things that makes it challenging then, if we employ this approach is the dynamic programming problem cannot be solved easily. And so that's basically where this algorithm comes into play, because it's one of those few algorithms that actually does not require you to be able to solve that dynamic programming problem. And basically, it's leveraging the data to do a few approximations in the early stages, and then doing some simulations based on kind of the first stage approximations, right? And so basically, you can use this method then to recover the key parameters in the utility function, and as well as in the weight transition process. Right? And so you can see that if we look at the utility function, people get utility from just consuming food calories. People get some utility, but far less, from exercise. We see that people get a lot of utility from just staying within the daily budget of calories, the theta subscript I mean. And then finally, we see there's a positive effect also from the feeling of long-term weight loss progress, which is captured by the polynomial in the theta g's. Right? And so these are all very encouraging results for us, because they're, first of all, they're consistent with the simpler regression discontinuity findings we had. But secondly, they actually confirm in this more formal way that the short-term goals actually add some utility to the users, right? And so that's actually a very interesting finding, we feel. But the real reason we want to estimate the model using the data we have is so that we can answer a question that's very managerially relevant, at least for the Lose It company. And so what we do with the model, what the model allows us to do once it's been fitted with the data, is we can consider various hypothetical policies in which we adjust the daily budget of calories by a small amount. We can't adjust it too much, or else it will actually have a real impact on the way in which the nutritionist calculated that budget. And so a few policies that we bounced around with the company include, first, a uniform policy where we simply make the budget adjustments for all the users, or alternatively, we could do a conditional policy where we make the budget adjustment only to users who are making progress towards their long-term weight loss goal, right? And so this picture is basically capturing the amount of user engagement on the app, or how much lifetime value they're getting from the app, which is what's captured on the vertical axis. And on the horizontal axis, we're looking at small changes, small percentage changes of the daily budget. And you can see that in the solid blue line, as you increase the daily budget, users are getting more out of the app, in the sense that they're getting higher utility, they're more engaged with the app. And sometimes that kind of makes sense, because because of the fact that they get utility from these small victories, by making it easier to achieve these small victories, these users are getting more out of this application. Now, ideally, from a nutrition standpoint, we probably would like to consider policies that make it harder, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we want people to consume fewer calories. But the downfall of that is that if we make it harder, people will ultimately get less utility from it, because it's a more challenging goal. They're less likely to succeed at it, and therefore they don't get as much of this sense of accomplishment, as you can see as we move to the left in the solid blue line. One way to avoid such a steep drop in the utility, in the lifetime utility, would be to employ these conditional budget adjustments. We're making it harder only for people who are actually making some success towards their long-term goal. And so that's captured by the dashed lighter blue line, the conditional budget change. And we can see that in those cases, if we're intent on making it more challenging for the users, the conditional budget adjustment might actually be a better way to go about this, in the sense that we're making it harder for people who are likely able to succeed with this harder budget, right? And so these are some of the main, findings from our structural analysis. And the interesting thing to note is that some of these ideas that the company may actually try to employ in the future, and they might even be doing various A/B tests based on the findings we have right now. So we're excited to see some of this research we've done being applied to the actual mobile weight loss app. So that we hope is our way to make a real difference based on this combination of marketing research and big data. And so just to summarize, this research of ours studies the weight loss trajectories of people from this large-scale freemium mobile weight loss app. We show in various ways, and I hope it's convincing, we show various methods that there is indeed a causal relationship between these small victories and the long-term goal achievement. Right? So if you stay within the daily budget, even just by a little bit, that's enough to propel you towards your long-term weight loss goal. Right? And our structural analysis, the combination of the modeling and the data, it gives us the ability to think of alternative ways to tweak and adjust the daily budget to get more out of the users, or maybe offer more to the users, I mean. Right? And so that said, I want to thank everyone for sitting in on this webinar. I want to thank Laurette and Sean for the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this work, either during this webinar or even offline through email if you're so inclined. So thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you, Nathan, for a really wonderful and interesting talk about a topic that many of us probably struggle with personally, but also seeing how you're informing application development for this. I mean, I think it's such an important area for people and the research. So the very interesting talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll open the floor to questions, and of course I'll unmute Laurette and offer her the chance to have the first question.
Thank you very much, Nathan. It's excellent work. I have 2 or 3 questions from a kind of a modeling perspective. Sean, you can take about a question from the floor, and then I will come back more pragmatically about those freemium, premium digital tools to understand more from a strategic perspective. In terms of modeling first, when you were talking about the possibility of adjusting the short-term goal, is your model actually the algorithm? Are you then tailoring the person suggested goal as a function of his or her pattern of relationship between daily variation and the overall goal? Or is it more kind of an population level inference that you are drawing and then bringing more finer grain information at the aggregate level? So why don't you address that question, Nathan? Then I will have a 1B question.
That's a great question. So basically what this exercise is intended to do is to help the firm develop more refined budget strategies, right? So right now, the current status quo, to the best of our knowledge, from what they told us, is the formula they use to calculate the budget of calories that everyone gets. It's essentially a deterministic function of the information you offer at the registration, right? So there's nothing adaptive about the budget, right? So based on the dynamics of how you're successful or not successful, how you're losing weight, how you're tracking the calories, the budget is completely invariant to that. And what our exercise is suggesting is that it doesn't need to be invariant. In fact, there could be some benefits of allowing for some flexibility to make it a little bit more customized. So I don't know the extent to which we'll be able to customize it at a person, like, you know, based on one person and another person, but we can at least cater the budget design algorithm based on kind of the overall trajectory of a particular person's weight loss. And so I would lean towards saying it's more relate to kind of the first point you made in terms of how we're incorporating the data to better inform the budget design. Because currently the status quo is that this data of the dynamics and the usage is not being used to modify and update the budget.
So can you go further within the empirical and dynamics modeling that you are having, or would you need machine learning to really get to the actual behavioral precision approach, so that it is not like this dynamics between the pattern over time and the outcome is likely to vary from one individual to the other? If I understand currently, what you just said is that the current state of affairs is that this budget is currently determined, is based on the deterministic approach, most likely as a function of standards and things like that. So between this and bringing in this finer grain specification that you seem to be able to bring from your model, but I believe that is still estimated at kind of some aggregate level. Could you go further toward this real precision approach? So if you can just elaborate a bit more on that.
I agree. I think machine learning or statistical learning can actually be used to get more fine-tuned, I guess, behavioral aspects incorporate into the model, right? So currently, the way in which we deal with user-specific heterogeneity is a fairly simple standard approach. But you could think of maybe a scenario where, you know, people react very differently to different types of treatments, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's something that our model doesn't quite accommodate for, but it could. And in fact, I have some other work in the past that more methodological work that could be incorporated to add this kind of more behavioral or this fine-grained richness to the utility and the behavior of the users. So I think a combination of either machine learning and statistical learning with the structural modeling approach we already have on hand, that combination will allow us to get more fine-grained predictions and also policy suggestions for short-term goal design.
Thank you. One big question to my more theoretical, and then Sean, you can shift to the virtual floor if there is question. In your slide at the end where you have your lifetime utility, and you have on your x-axis the vis-a-vis zero, whether you are failing to achieve your short-term goal or whether you are surpassing them, exactly this one. And here, it seems to be that you're gaining over having a positive outcome vis-a-vis your goal has a bigger effect than a negative. And in some way, typically in prospect theory, we always say that losses looms larger than gain. So your pattern of result is the opposite. So my question is twofold. One is the difference in your slope as you are in the negative adherence vis-a-vis the positive is there. Is it a significant differences? One, but two, conceptually, what is it about this domain of self-enhancement goal that may be different than what prospect theory has been doing, very much developing within the context of risk and not in the context of that more experiential space that is about those weight gain and eating and so on. So Nathan?
A great question. So just the first part, the difference should be significant. We don't have the numbers on hand, but just the fact that we have so many observations and the data so big, I would not be surprised if that difference in the slopes is. I would not be surprised if it's statistically significant. So that whatever the picture shows, it should be pretty concrete, just because we have millions and millions and millions of observations. Now, the point you bring up about the potential divergence from the prospect theory, that one, I'm very curious about as well. I haven't thought too much about it, but my initial gut feeling is that the notion of loss, in terms of the notion of loss may not have a perfect one-to-one correspondence with the analogy in our case would be failure in terms of the staying within the budget. I think from many of the users' perspective, their default might actually be that they're not expecting, it's not something they feel entitled that they're going to actually be able to stay within the budget. And in some sense, it's something they have to earn. They have to work hard to actually deserve this success. And so, in that sense, based on this intuition, I would not be surprised if the slope is either equal or even larger for cases where they're successful, because it's really solidifying the notion that they're actually working hard and they're doing well. If they are kind of failing and exceed the budget, then I guess they could rationalize it as maybe it was just a one-off thing, or they accidentally consumed just a little bit too much. There might be some sort of behavioral mechanism, perhaps, that they're using to compensate internally for the failure in a way that would kind of make the slopes look like that. But I need to think more about this. This is a very
because what I was going to ask is that here we are talking about food, we are talking about physical activity, but what you just said, if I kind of look at the prospect theory literature developed primarily within the context of risky gain and loss in your financial investment vis-a-vis your current state of affairs. So would your answer to my question be any different if you were talking about your the management of your financial, whether it is stock market investment or even your just financial budget in the way you manage. So would your answer be any different from the one that you just gave me?
Well, I think the context would be different enough that at least if we're talking about prospect theory, I think the implications of prospect theory might be very different for that scenario where you're actually dealing with money or some sort of tangible good versus this weight loss application, which is purely just kind of self-enhancement. And so in that sense, I think that's where those might be some interesting cases where there's differences in the implications of prospect theory. Though I would expect that the implications of goal design, that should be somewhat universal, hopefully. Not just in the weight loss context, but as I mentioned, in the education context, energy context, other sorts of app developments. So.
Thank you. Sean, I'm shifting back to you for if there is questions from the virtual floor.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. If anybody would like to ask a question, I've muted everybody just to reduce background noise. You're welcome to unmute and ask Nathan the question, or you can also type it in the chat window if you're more comfortable doing that. Is there any questions from the floor? I will take silence as no. So I guess, Laurette, you can continue asking your last question if you'd like.
Okay, that's good. My question now is more on getting a bit more information on the freemium vs premium version of the app so that we understand a bit more what is behind the cost and benefits of from a user perspective in each of those conditions. And then my related theoretical question will be, there was early work by George Lowenstein and others at the time with smoking, where there was some values, not in the context of digital application, but in the context of those repeated programs where there was, in fact, some actual incentive commitment that were tied to the performance vis-a-vis the service provider. So if you could provide a bit more information on the app in terms of the freemium, premium, and then give some thoughts about to what extent the results that you get could inform the relevance of integrating more of the person's performance in the actual pricing structure of the app.
Okay, great. So just as a clarification, there's actually not too many differences between the premium and the freemium version. So the cost difference, I think the price changes a little bit over time, but the last I checked, it's somewhere between $10 to $30 a month. And so what you get by paying the premium, not many people do, by the way, but what you get from paying the premium is you get an app without the advertisements, right? So if you look at the screenshot I showed earlier, there's an banner ad over here. So if you get the premium version, you don't have to see that or deal with that. You get, probably the main benefit is you get more specific nutritional targeting, where everything's going to be based on a daily budget, but in addition to the daily budget, they can say how much of the budget you should spend towards protein, fiber, fats, what kind of vitamins, these sort of more detailed aspects. So that's really kind of the main difference between the free version and the one that you have to pay a little bit more for. In terms of applications, so just to double check I understand your question correctly, you're asking whether we have some insights that could inform us about how they would choose the prices?
My question was, that's why I was asking the difference between the freemium and the premium, because could it be, for instance, my question will apply, it seems, equally to the freemium and the premium, because it's all based on a subscription, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
There's no kind of transaction specific financial cost associated to any of this thing. So my two follow-up questions will be, and we will end after this, is that would you think that whether it's a freemium or premium, there could be some commitment value to give some premium discount or premium overcharge if you were, as a function of your performance from your goal, akin to those real-world experiments that George Lowenstein had done at the time, that you were paying actually your coach more or less as a function of your performance of quitting smoking. So that's my question A. And then the question B is that, have you modeled separately the freemium and the premium subjects? Because one of the things that is interesting in the difference between the two is that if you just play with calorie, it's kind of a generic common currency. If you now start having more specific local goal as a function of the composition of this currency, I think you may have different dynamics happening there, and whether there could be both further research and further app design in looking at this granularity in terms of the dynamics.
Yes. So we, for now, have abstracted a little bit from the kind of the freemium versus premium aspects. One of the reasons we did that, we abstracted away from that, at least in the structural analysis, is there's just not enough people who have signed up for the premium. So we have just a very small fraction of the data. If we want to do some sort of comparison between the premium and the freemium dynamics. But I agree that there's some opportunities to look into kind of the implications of the premium design, the premium pricing, the commitment aspects of it on long-term success. And in fact, virtually a lot of the at least economics and quant marketing literature on incentives have been focused on monetary incentives. So my part is that there should be some impact of introducing some sort of pricing or commitment, monetary commitment device on people's success. But in our case, we were actually more interested in the non-monetary aspects, which is just really the psychological feeling of simply staying within the budget. Because then in that case, it's actually a very simple. I think it's actually one of the more simpler nudges one could think of. But yeah, I don't have a perfect answer for your question, because we haven't quite dug deep into the dynamics of the kind of the pricing, the implications of the pricing, and also a challenge of looking at pricing is that there's no variation in the prices that people get. So basically, everyone gets the exact same price. Of course, one avenue we could take is we could work with the company to try to introduce some pseudo-exogenous variation in the price to see how people respond to prices and the commitment, the implications of premium. But I hope this at least half answers your question. I'd be happy to think more about this to maybe provide you a more informed answer offline.
Yeah. Thank you. One last question, and I promise it's real this time. When you mentioned that in the freemium where you have advertisement, two questions. Are those public service advertisement and commercial food advertisement? Would the database enable to link exposure to those with the actual, not just commitment to the goal? That's one thing that could be interesting, but your client are providing the actual food level input. So could there be kind of further research and further app development that could be relevant at that level?
Yes, yes. So I think that's one really, really great goal of mine. That, in fact, it's something I didn't quite think of in that exact way, but it is definitely a possibility to look into kind of the interaction between the advertisements and the calorie consumption, food consumption goal success. And so that's definitely within the realm of possibility. In fact, my guess is that the company that already does a little bit of A/B testing with the ads, but one thing I do need to find out exactly the structure of their ads, right? So do they have it? One thing I'm not 100% sure about is like the extent to which they actually have control over what's being displayed, because if they're part of an advertisement banner network, then it's really up to that advertising agency or the banner, like the network, to determine which ads are shown based on their bidding algorithms. And so that's why when you look at the ads, at least whenever I turn on the app, it tends to be more of the commercial apps. So I haven't seen any, like, for example, public service announcements, some sort of, awareness advertising about a particular health initiative. So I haven't seen any of these more nonprofit type of ads, but I think it would be interesting if it's possible to create some variation in ads and then look at how people respond to the ads, and also in real life in terms of the food vacancy.
Thank you. Very, very promising line of work, both from a research as well as from a digital innovation perspective, and more impactful behavioral change attempt by everyone. Back to you, Sean.
Yeah, so since we must have been having a couple technical difficulties, we have two questions from the chat room, and then we'll have to end after that. So we have a question from Jen. Okay. Hi, Dr. Yang. I have a question about the autoregressive nature of the model. I'm not sure if I interpret this correctly, but did you mention that the weight of the previous day predicts the weight of the following day? Could you please clarify how the calorie budget plays a role in the autoregressive equation?
Okay, so the weight equation here, it's very simple. It's just it's true. It's the previous day's weight will predict your next day's weight. That seems, I think that's somewhat logical. I'm 150 pounds or somewhere around that. So tomorrow I'm probably going to be around that ballpark, I think. The weight, as for the calorie budget, it doesn't enter into the weight explicitly, right? It enters in perhaps indirectly through the food and exercise calories. And the way it enters into the weight equation through these variables is that how much food I consume and how much exercise I do, it's going to be affected by my utility, right? And my utility is a function of this budget, right? This daily budget. And so in some sense, through this utility function, there is going to be an impact on the dynamics of the weight, right? So the budget will actually have an impact on the dynamics of the weight through my behavior with respect to food and exercise calorie consumption. I hope this answers the question, but I'm happy to elaborate further if there's more clarification.
Okay. Jen indicates from the chat window she understands. So
okay,
great. And then the last question is from Srini in the chat window. Since you monitor the step count and food intake, calorie and nutrition, were you able to find any correlation between weight loss and performance of an individual?
Oh, you mean in terms of the exercise? Sorry, the performance in terms of the...
Yeah, it is in the exercise. It is from the angle of exercise.
Oh, okay, okay. There's not, exercise doesn't seem, like there is a correlation with weight loss and exercise, but it seems to be not as substantial as, say, the correlation between food calorie restriction and weight loss. I think this is probably consistent with what the nutritionists, like the health experts have found. I think in general, exercise itself actually is not, it's good for healthiness, but it's not, it alone is not kind of a reliable weight loss tool. Like it's really part of a general, more kind of broader approach.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a statistically significant but small magnitude effect of exercise and weight loss relative to food restriction.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, again, I'd like to thank our speaker, Nathan, for a really wonderful talk, and we'll be announcing, we don't have a new, the next date solidified for our bridge webinar, but we'll be sending out announcements when we do, so we hope we all can, we'll see you there. Thank you very much for everybody joining.
Well,
thank you, Nathan. Thank you all. Bye-bye.